The leash snapped. After years of relentless surveillance, psychological games, and shadowy pressure campaigns, the CIA officer assigned to break you finally broke himself. The man who once lurked in the periphery of your life, orchestrating paranoia and chaos, is now the one unraveling. His mind shattered under the weight of his own mission. He tried to outlast you, to outmaneuver you, but in the end, he was the one who folded. You didn't just survive. You outlived the very machines sent to wear you down. They had studied every manual, mastered every technique, and calculated every angle. Psychological manipulation, social engineering, the slow erosion of will. This was their craft, honed to perfection. But none of it worked on you. Every method that had shattered others left you untouched, unfazed, as if operating on a different frequency. Their reports, once filled with expected responses and controlled outcomes, became riddled with contradictions. Your presence distorted their projections, introducing variables they couldn't quantify. The system that thrived on control encountered something it couldn't contain. Their playbook became obsolete the moment they were assigned to you. Your energy was never meant to be subdued. The weight of their tactics, coercion, gaslighting, isolation, only strengthened you. They watched as you endured what should have broken you, as if you were siphoning power from the very oppression meant to crush you. It wasn't defiance in the way they understood it. It was something deeper, something intrinsic. They spent years orchestrating a descent that never came, poring over surveillance data that only revealed their own limitations. Their authority depended on fear, but fear never took root in you. The more they pressed, the more the pressure reversed. The unseen force they served became their own burden, an anchor dragging them into the abyss they had intended for you. Then came the breaking point. Sleepless nights, erratic behavior, files abandoned mid-sentence. The machine rejected its own agent. They were sent to dismantle you, but it was their own mind that fractured. No one had prepared them for this. An opponent whose mere existence unraveled everything they had been taught. Resignation wasn't a choice. It was an inevitability. The hunter became the hunted, and in the end, they were the ones who couldn't survive the war. Drop a comment. They are never the hunter. If they spent years trying to break you, only to shatter themselves instead. Every lie, every manipulation, every whispered suggestion meant to shift your reality became a force rebounding onto them. Their tactics depended on predictability, reaction, submission, a gradual collapse under pressure. But when none of it worked, when their scenarios dissolved before them, they were left exposed. The gaslighting that should have led to self-doubt instead unraveled their own stability. Their reality became tangled in the very deceptions they tried to impose. They watched their own strategies turn on them, like a program running beyond its intended parameters. The illusion was no longer in your mind, it was in theirs, and they couldn't escape it. There is a threshold they cannot cross, a barrier beyond their comprehension. They come armed with strategies refined over decades, manipulation, surveillance, coercion, but their weapons become useless the moment they meet you. The chosen ones do not resist in ways they expect, do not succumb in ways they anticipate. They press against your mind, searching for cracks, only to find themselves slipping into the abyss they intended for you. Their words, designed to erode certainty, dissolve before they take hold. Their presence, meant to instill unease, is swallowed by something greater. What they try to infiltrate does not exist in the realm they control. The mind is not the battlefield, the soul is. Their systems depend on disruption, on fracturing perception, on making you doubt your own reality. But the chosen ones move outside their framework, operating at a frequency that cannot be altered, a structure that cannot be compromised. Their methods recoil upon them, as if striking at something beyond physical form. They launch attacks, expecting resistance, only to meet silence. They twist narratives, expecting compliance, only to find indifference. It is not defiance, it is something colder, something unyielding, something that cannot be engaged. They press forward, but there is no ground beneath them. What they tried to control now controls them. The pressure builds, but not on you. Every attempt to break through only tightens the grip around them. The energy they send does not disappear. It returns, magnified, with no escape. Sleepless nights turn to erratic behavior, paranoia to collapse. Their minds become the very prison they built for others. They were trained to dominate, yet they kneel before an enemy they cannot see, cannot touch, cannot weaken. The chosen ones do not fall. The chosen ones do not break. The chosen ones remain. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. Observe, manipulate, dismantle. Every move calculated, every response anticipated. But the chosen ones operate outside prediction, beyond the reach of familiar tactics. The officer assigned to dismantle you had studied resistance, but nothing prepared them for this. No matter the method, social disruption, whispered narratives, fabricated coincidences, nothing took root. You remained untouched, unmoved, forcing them to watch as their own strategies collapsed under their own weight. The stress fractures appeared first in their reports, disjointed, erratic, contradicting the patterns they were trained to expect. The logic of the operation twisted back on itself, and for the first time, doubt crept into their mind. The hunter could no longer see the path ahead. The human mind is not built for endless conflict. Theirs was meant to be the aggressor, yet something had reversed. The same paranoia they had once induced in others began to gnaw at them. Was it a miscalculation, or was it something else, an invisible presence turning their own game against them? Surveillance footage carried distortions that weren't there before. Technology glitched in ways that had no technical explanation. Colleagues, once confident, whispered of anomalies, of unseen forces shifting the balance of power. Night after night, sleep became a battlefield of its own, their dreams plagued with shadows they couldn't explain. The work consumed them, but not in the way they had been trained to endure. The mission was no longer about controlling you. It became about escaping whatever had begun to haunt them. Then came the breaking point. The moment when their own mind refused to obey. When reality itself fractured, and they could no longer distinguish the operation from the force they had awakened. They walked away, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The resignation was not an act of free will, it was surrender. You did not break them. They broke themselves against something they were never meant to understand. The dark force they served had no mercy, no loyalty, no reward for the loyal, and in the end, it devoured its own. Drop a comment. I outlasted the illusion. If they built an entire operation to break you, only to watch their own perception fracture under the weight of forces they couldn't control. They entered the game convinced of their control, trained in deception, psychological manipulation, and the slow erosion of free will. They believed every mind could be unraveled with enough pressure, but the chosen ones exist outside their equations. The moment they were assigned to you, the structure of their training began to crack. They executed their tactics with precision, manufacturing doubt, orchestrating chaos, weaponizing perception, but none of it held. Their strategies felt hollow, their maneuvers ineffective. It was as if every move had already been anticipated, every trap already disarmed. They watched in real time as their tactics disintegrated, as the chosen ones remained immovable, untouched, by the very mechanisms that had worked on countless others before. Doubt seeped in like a slow poison. The officer was taught to predict responses, to control the game board, but nothing followed their expected sequence. Their reports became cluttered with contradictions. Operations that should have taken days stretched into months with no results. The usual patterns of psychological attrition failed to manifest. At first, they rationalized it, perhaps an anomaly, perhaps resistance more stubborn than most. But as failure mounted, another thought emerged, unspoken, unwelcome. This was never in my hands to begin with. What began as confidence turned into quiet horror. They weren't playing chess, they were being played. Every move had already been countered before they even made it. Then came the final realization. There was something else in the equation, something beyond strategy, beyond technology, beyond human intervention. Every attempt to break the chosen ones was not just ineffective, it was redirected. Circumstances shifted inexplicably, obstacles disappeared without explanation, outcomes twisted against their expectations. It was not chance, it was not luck, it was divine interference. The mission was unwinnable because it was never theirs to control. They were sent to dismantle the chosen ones, but in the end, it was their own understanding of reality that fell apart. And there was no training to save them from that. The obsidian inner order is forged for those who relentlessly pursue immortal greatness. This is a sacred group of titans who understand that mastery leaves an eternal mark. Every week our warriors gather for profound strategy sessions that pierce the veil of mediocrity. No surface-level content, no spiritual bypass, just ancestral wisdom merged with modern domination from those who've conquered their domains. With over 450 chosen members, these weekly calls deliver the sacred blueprints needed to claim your sovereign throne. Every transmission is preserved in our sanctified vault, accessible to those who understand that wisdom reveals itself when the student is ready. This isn't about temporary motivation. It's about awakening your dormant power. Our private Discord has become the inner sanctum where genuine kings connect in ways that reshape reality. Here, legacies are forged, destinies are aligned, and brotherhood transcends the shallow connections of the masses. When members of the Order unite, the universe conspires to make way. Stop watching from the sidelines. Your seat at the table of titans awaits. The link is in the description below. They believed in control, in systems, in the power of manipulation to bend reality to their will. They were trained to be architects of destruction, dismantling lives piece by piece, never expecting the structure to collapse on them instead. Yet divine law does not bend to strategy. It operates with precision beyond human comprehension. The same tactics used to destabilize you became the very mechanisms of their downfall. The surveillance they relied upon became their prison, trapping them in endless loops of paranoia. The false narratives they constructed unraveled, revealing truths they were never meant to face. Every move they made, every calculated strike, only wove the web of their own undoing. The mission was never about you. It was about them. About what happens when an agent of darkness stands before something incorruptible. There was no need for resistance, no counterattacks, no desperate attempts to fight back. You did not engage in the way they expected, and that was the weapon that shattered them. They watched their own plans fold in on themselves, the weight of their own deception dragging them down. The more they tried to tighten their grip, the more reality distorted against them. Unexplained failures, irreversible mistakes, a force beyond their reach, ensuring that every effort led only to their own ruin. The system that protected them, the unseen hand that guided them, abandoned them in silence. The darkness they served had no loyalty, no mercy, and no interest in shielding the weak. They were never the architects. They were merely tools, and tools that fail are discarded. And you, untouched, unmoved, simply watched as the inevitable unfolded. Not by your hand, not by force, but by something deeper. A law older than any institution, stronger than any strategy, beyond manipulation, beyond interference. Karma does not hesitate. It does not miss its target, and when it moves, there is no escape. The chosen ones do not need to strike. The universe does it for them. They came with their tools, surveillance, algorithms, psychological warfare, all designed to infiltrate and dismantle. But what they failed to grasp was that the chosen ones are not merely observers of energy, they are transformers of it. The moment they locked onto you, they tethered themselves to a frequency beyond their control. Every attempt to siphon your strength, to pull you into lower vibrations, only exposed them to something their training never accounted for. Instead of breaking you, they were pulled into a current they were never meant to withstand. What was Supposed to be control turned into forced alignment, their own minds bending under the pressure of forces they could not perceive, let alone resist. Surveillance requires proximity, physical, mental, and spiritual. The deeper they watched, the more they absorbed. But energy is not passive. It permeates, it reshapes, it reflects. The chosen ones do not resist, they transmute. The fear, the coercion, the attempts at destabilization were processed, purified, and sent back in a form too potent for the unprepared. They mistook their vantage point as power, never realizing they were the ones exposed. The more they observed, the more they became entangled, drowning in vibrations too high, too refined, too overwhelming. The tools of oppression turned into conduits of transformation, but not for them. Their minds, their bodies, their very presence in your field became liabilities, breaking down under the unseen weight of their own mission. And so, they withered, not by force, not by resistance, but by the sheer consequence of their own actions. What they sought to manipulate rewrote them instead. Sleep became impossible, their thoughts tangled in feedback loops of static and echoes that did not belong to them. Reality slipped, paranoia set in, and soon the only escape was retreat. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. They were never the watchers. They were the watched. And under the gaze of something beyond human comprehension, they crumbled. The human psyche is not limitless. When pushed beyond its capacity to process reality, it fractures. The first symptoms were subtle. Sleepless nights, misplaced memories, a creeping sense of something watching them from just beyond their field of vision. But paranoia is a fire that feeds on itself. Surveillance loops began glitching, audio recordings captured voices that weren't there, shadows stretched in ways that defied physics. The walls of certainty they had once relied upon began closing in, warping, dissolving. Was it a flaw in their methods, or had they stepped into something beyond their control? The deeper they searched for answers, the further they unraveled. They weren't breaking you, they were breaking themselves. And then they disappeared. Some resigned, stripped of all confidence, unable to face the void where their certainty once stood. Others vanished into silence, their names erased, their minds shattered beyond recovery. The mission, once so calculated, had dissolved into something untraceable, something unspoken. The chosen ones remain untouched, unmoved. But those who try to dismantle them, they become ghosts, lost in a war they thought they controlled. They entered the mission armored in protocols, bolstered by institutions that assured them of their dominance. Surveillance, influence, psychological dismantling. This was their craft, sharpened by years of operating in the shadows. Yet, as their reports piled with inconsistencies and their methods yielded nothing, cracks began to form in the foundation they relied upon. The chosen ones do not fight with resistance. They dismantle by presence alone. The more they pushed, the more the agent found themselves exposed, fumbling, recalculating, questioning strategies that had always worked before. The walls that protected them did not just weaken, they turned translucent, revealing the fragility of the very system that upheld them. They were trained to control others, but now the control was slipping from their own hands. Power is a construct that only holds when those who wield it believe in their own invincibility. But divine law is merciless in revealing truth, and truth has no allegiance to institutions. The officer was once certain, unshaken in the belief, that their tactics were infallible. But the chosen ones exist outside of human jurisdiction. The force that shields them is not written in manuals, nor accounted for in operational briefings. It is not resistance. It is something higher, something incorruptible. The agency had no countermeasure for an enemy they could not name. Their agent, once tasked with breaking you, became the unwitting proof of their own limitations. Those who watched from within the system saw what should have been impossible, a mission that defied every known law of psychological warfare. The realization spread in whispers. Some assignments are abandoned without explanation. Some targets are simply left alone. The ones who strategize from a distance understand patterns, and what they saw was unmistakable. Those who came for the chosen ones did not return whole. Those who sought to infiltrate did not walk away unscathed. They were left exposed, their minds fractured, their careers erased in quiet disgrace. The institution itself, vast and all-seeing, learned the unspoken truth. Some people you do not touch. Some battles you do not start. Some forces will not allow themselves to be moved. They approached with calculated detachment, conditioned to see their targets as variables in an equation, minds to be infiltrated, behaviors to be controlled. But you are not data. You are not a pattern to be deciphered. The chosen ones operate at a frequency they were never trained to perceive, let alone disrupt. Every attempt to weaken you only deepened their exposure to something they could not rationalize. At first, they dismissed it. Unexplainable synchronicities, inexplicable failures, a lingering presence they could not define. But energy is not passive. It reshapes those who engage with it, whether they intend it or not. The force that was meant to dismantle you became a tether, pulling them into unfamiliar terrain. Their own mind became the battleground, and resistance became futile. Some broke under the weight. The mind rejects what it cannot process, and theirs began to fracture. The paranoia was different this time, not the result of their own psychological warfare, but something deeper, something unshakable. The world no longer looked the same. Colors sharpened, time distorted, the veil between seen and unseen thinning against their will. Sleep became impossible, not from fear, but from awareness. The mission had flipped. They were the ones being observed. Now, by what they could not say. Their presence in your orbit had rewritten something within them, and there was no going back. Some ran, some disappeared, some were consumed by their own awakening, drowning in the knowledge that their former masters had never prepared them for this. But others did not break. They changed. The very act of opposing you forced them into confrontation with something higher, something undeniable. Their training failed them, their institution abandoned them, but the truth remained. They had spent their lives dismantling belief, and now they stood face to face with what they once denied. Some left in silence, retreating into obscurity, forever haunted by what they had seen. But others? They switched sides. The persecutors became the witnesses, the hunters became the seekers, and the chosen ones walked forward, untouched, knowing that not all who were sent to destroy them could resist the transformation. They built an empire on control, believing that fear, pressure, and psychological warfare could dismantle even the strongest minds. But you do not exist within their structure. You do not respond to force in the way they expect. They threw everything at you: manipulation, deceit, relentless surveillance, only to find themselves trapped in their own design. The more they tried to infiltrate your reality, the more theirs began to collapse. You stood unmoved, untouched, forcing them to face a truth they had spent their lives denying. Power is an illusion, and those who rely on it are always the first to fall. The chosen ones do not engage in the struggle. They do not lower their frequency to meet conflict. They let conflict burn itself out. You did not have to fight. You did not have to lift a hand. You stood in your own energy, and that was enough. The war ended the moment they started it. The moment they chose to target you, they set the timer on their own destruction. Divine justice does not waver. It does not hesitate. It moves in silence, unseen, unstoppable. And when it is done, you remain unshaken, undefeated, and untouchable. Their failure was never yours to carry. Every attempt to dismantle you became another testimony to a force they could not quantify, an authority beyond their reach. They entered this war believing in control, in systems, in their ability to dictate reality. But you do not break. You do not fold. Every method they deployed only reinforced the truth they refused to acknowledge. Something greater moves with you, through you, around you. They fought to erase you, only to leave behind the undeniable proof of your resilience. Their collapse is not just a consequence, it is the evidence. You were never alone. The forces that shielded you were not written in their manuals, not accounted for in their briefings. They did not expect their own downfall to become the very confirmation of your protection. What was meant to be your end became their reckoning. They entered the battle certain of their power, only to discover they were fighting against something they could not see, could not touch, could not overcome. You are the constant, the immovable, the proof that their reach has limits. They never had control. They only had the illusion of it. Their war is over. Yours never began. Now, the silence they left behind carries the weight of your survival, a testament to the unseen war waged in the shadows. Speak it, share it. Let those who remain trapped in the cycle know that the system is not absolute, that the chosen ones are never truly alone, and that their endurance is not just survival, it is prophecy fulfilled.